we're hearing European sovereignty, European tech sovereignty a lot lately. When you think about it, UK tech sovereignty, maybe. When you think about it, what does that mean to you? Minister, would you like to start?
Yeah, Amy, and can I just firstly thank Bloomberg for having me on here as well. It was one of my first media appearances as well, and so I've been very grateful for this opportunity to talk about the UK's plans on AI. Sovereignty to me means two things. It means a minimal conception of sovereignty at the very least, where we can sit at the negotiating table and look at the British public and say that we did everything we could and needed to ensure that Britain had resilient access to critical parts of the supply chain for a fundamental transformative technology that is artificial intelligence. So critical access being maintained over time is a fundamental conception of it. But I think our ambitions are greater than that. It's not just to have the minimal access to those parts of the supply chain, but to have an ambitious conception that a lot of the economic value that we think AI will create and generate will be both created and generated in the UK and captured in the UK as well. And so the floor to the ambition on sovereignty is to make sure that we have strategic leverage at the negotiating table, but the skies is what we're shooting for in generating and capturing economic returns here in the UK.
Audrey, what do you think?
First of all, I think this concept has made the biggest comeback in the concept in the last 10 years. I'm not a huge fan of the sovereignty concept, but I think what we try to put behind this idea is first independence, second, control, how for such an important technology we offer customers and public sectors and government the control over the data that are used by the technology. And the last one is choice, because we know how much goods and services we import for the US. It's not a bad thing to choose US providers if they bring the best offer, but we need to get an alternative. So I think for us, the idea behind this concept of sovereignty is more a question about how do we own the technology, how do sensitive industry own the technology, and owning the technology means having great models, but also owning the infrastructure.
So what I'm hearing is strategic leverage and control over the infrastructure, and potentially one of the obstacles to that is Europe and the UK's, relative size in the tech industry compared to maybe US and China on AI. So examining that structural gap, what would it take for Europe to compete more aggressively? Is it a question of capital? Is it a question of coordination? Is it a question of risk tolerance? Audrey, what do you think?
So I think we need to be optimistic. I mean, we would not have created this company in Europe if we were not optimistic. But indeed, we have a lot of talents in Europe. We have everything in our power to build great AI. But what we need today is to move with a bigger urgency to keep Europe, and when I say Europe, I'm sorry, I include the UK, but indeed, I talk about as a continent. But indeed, I think there's several points that are important to maintain our place in the race, and maintaining our place in the race is not a question of having a good AI from Europe. It's a question about software. It's a question about owning our defense system. So it's a very strategic thing to actually increase our positioning in the global AI race. I think the first point is accelerating and supporting, fostering the demand. We are lagging behind in terms of AI usage in enterprise, in governments, in public sector in general. We need to accelerate, because without this demand, without the revenue, you can't find investors. So you need definitely to foster this better AI adoption. I think the second part is about indeed the talent. We had so many great schools in the UK, in France, in Poland. So we have some of the best researchers in AI in the world, but how many of them are working in the Silicon Valley? How can we make sure that they come back? How do we create a way to incentivize them to come back and make sure that they will benefit to the creation of a good and strong frontier AI in Europe? And indeed, we talk about regulation and how regulation and innovation can sometimes oppose themselves. We do not believe that it's a strong opposition. We believe that some good and smart regulation can actually help a good competition and help to support European companies. But that being said, we need to ensure that it's easy to navigate. We need to simplify. I've been with Mistral for 2 years, which is almost the length of the company. And this is so painful, honestly, for a startup to try to navigate all the different regulation at the EU level, at the national level, and how some of them are overlapping each other, how GDPR is not just one GDPR, it's actually 27 interpretation of it. So we're not saying that we should get rid of regulation, but it's more a question of how do we leverage regulation to create something that would create a benefit for European companies and will not create useless burden for them.
Kanishka, how do you see government's role then in creating this regulatory clarity, but also creating an attractive environment for talent to stay local, for companies to feel confident in adopting AI?
Yeah, and if I can link it to the broader question as well, which is the question of what you do when your scale is small, but your ambition is very large. And to me, it really comes down to two things, risk and what the story is. The risk element, because I don't think there is any correlation fundamentally between the size of a country and the scale of its ambitions and what it can achieve. It is true when you look across the world that Taiwan has a particular sense of strategic leverage in the AI supply chain. The Dutch have a fantastic home with ASML. The Israelis across software have been able to achieve a huge amount, notwithstanding scale. In some cases, because of scale, the ability to move fast and create a particular sense of focus. And so, to me, the two big things are, one, risk across the UK, and I'd conjecture perhaps also across Europe. What we need is a sense that it's time to be risk on. And that is true in the private sector, it is true in civil society, it is true in government. And so in government's role, very particularly, where we're going is to say that to be risk on in a responsible way, but in a way that is deeply ambitious, you need to have a very different approach to how you're thinking about state capacity. This morning, we are announcing a AI sandbox, a AI growth lab, which will mean that companies now have regulatory clarity in the deployment of AI at scale right across this country. That is not a deregulatory measure, it is a measure of state capacity, because alongside it, we are funding the MHRA, the primary medicines and healthcare regulator in this country, with additional capacity to be able to keep up with that as well. And so right across government, we are trying to take an approach that says we recognize the fundamental crisis in this country over the last decade and a half has been a crisis of productivity, and it's time to tackle that head on by being risk on. And I would encourage everyone across civil society and the private sector to have a similar approach. I think we can achieve a lot in this country if we do that. The second part of it is one of the things I'm a relatively newcomer to politics. I had a background in tech and investing. And when I joined politics, people said to me, there are two types of politicians. One set of politicians talk, and people say, very, very smart, wonky person, great, interesting. And there's another kind of politician who speaks, and everyone says, I came out and I wanted to march, because there was a very clear sense of direction and a sense of what the story was. And so we don't just need to go away from these rooms and say it's time to be risk on, but we need to try and do that in a particular coherent and hopefully collective direction. And to do that, I think we need a very clear story of what a British trajectory on AI specifically looks like, or indeed an European trajectory in some places might look like. For Britain, I think we can be the world's adoption nation. We have amazing strengths historically in driving the adoption of technologies in different parts of the country. We've already seen in the last 3 years AI-related employment in Yorkshire and Wales, in the Northwest and the Midlands, doubling. It's time for us to try and do that a lot more. I think the public sector and government have a big role to play there. We also have a very particular strength in the quality of our research and talent, both in the academic and industry context as well. And so another thing that we're focused on is what we can try and do to turbocharge that, both domestically in our schools and university systems, but fundamentally in terms of Britain standing up tall and saying this is the moment for the world's best international talent on AI to come here and find a warm welcome.
So the regulatory sandbox, I want to bring back to that one because that's new this morning. What are you hoping to achieve with this? What's the scale of this? How does this actually flow through into policy and regulation in the UK ultimately?
What we're really fundamentally hoping to achieve is to work with businesses and regulators together to say where there are barriers, or whether that's on account of perception or in some places reality, regulatory barriers to productive deployment of AI. We want to work together with those organizations to try and find a collective solution that is way quicker. At the moment, lots of businesses and lots of different regulated industries try to deploy AI. The organizations quite understandably worry about the liability and risk management regimes in those areas. There's a lot of lack of clarity given a nascent technology and in regulatory contexts that are not as nascent. And so what we're really trying to do with the sandbox, as some of the historic examples of sandboxes in this country have shown, is that by creating an environment where companies can work very closely together, display what the capabilities of new technology are, what some of the upsides and downsides are, we can end up with a regulatory picture that is a lot more agile and adept to the reality of modern technology.
Okay. Now, on the topic of sovereignty, I wanted to bring it back to one of the big stories that we've been covering that very much touches on the theme at Bloomberg this week. The Dutch government seized control of Nexperia, a Dutch semiconductor company that's owned by a Chinese firm, WingTech. It's also a company that the UK has banned from owning chip production assets. If anybody remembers the Newport wafer fab issue from a few years ago, maybe just business journalists do. But at what point for critical tech, in your opinion, is it okay for the government to come in and block a deal or take ownership or control? Is it just a question of, that deal is okay when one of our allies does it? Or are you trying to find a way to balance maybe protectionism with access to capital?
I think that's a question for me.
Yes.
Well, look, I won't comment on the what is a live operational situation with Nexperia. So let me keep it broad. One of the things that I think we've ended up with is a rigorous national security and investment regime in this country. And in terms of your very specific question of how it balances source of capital relative to the nature of the technology, protectionism versus access to capital, the national security and investment regime has a relatively clear sort of rubric for how we end up assessing it. And of course, source of capital is one input into that. Some sources and countries, but also types of actors in particular from those countries have a different risk assessment to allies and companies that have been investing in the UK and have a healthy long-term history of doing so without a fundamental kind of IP challenge in terms of unexpected transfers. And then there are other places where we find that there are technologies that are still nascent but are so compelling for their long-term trajectory and in particular for dual-use application in the UK that we want to have a slightly greater threshold of where we're landing in terms of the relative balance between securing strategic leverage in the long term and allowing access to capital, being an international pool in particular. And so I think that regime broadly works well. I think there are things we can do to try and support its greater efficiency in terms of ways of working. But broadly, I think in terms of the rubric and the framework we have, it's both a clear one. I think it's very intelligible to investors across the world and to companies in the country. And certainly if that's not the case, I'd be very open to feedback on it.
Okay. You mentioned sort of strategically very important industries. I can see AI and the infrastructure around it becoming a critical industry, if it's not already. Are you thinking through that rubric as far as AI? What are you thinking about as far as industries that we want to protect that need to stay British in the AI industry?
I think in broad brush terms, and certainly key parts of the AI infrastructure context, developing compute in this country, for example, the mindset that we're in at the moment is less one of restriction and more one of proactive support. And so if you think about where we landed on the UK-US tech prosperity deal, the first ever tech prosperity deal and one of the largest set of infrastructure investment announcements, I think certainly in my kind of adult life in the UK. We have a British company in the midst of it, Nscale, now developing, headquartered in the UK, developing great capability and capacity in the UK, building compute facilities in an AI growth zone in the northeast, allowing a bunch of people in Newcastle and around there to both benefit from research advantages, healthcare advantages, and jobs fundamentally in that regional economy. And so where it's certainly part of our mind and an idea to be proactive in supporting British capability in this context as well, but to be very clear-eyed about the fact that we only do that, in that case, for example, if we work together with those who we are international allies with and who bring remarkable capabilities as well, in this case, NVIDIA and OpenAI in particular as well.
Okay. Now, Audrey, where this may apply to Mistral is thinking about who your investors might be and your sources of capital and who gets an equity stake. How do you think about that?
So, I mean, this is a very competitive race in an industry that requires a lot of capital. We were very, very lucky to be able to raise 1.7 billion with, among other, ASML really recently. But I think what matters the most for us is to build an independent company. The reason why the company was created was indeed to build an independent European company that would provide an alternative to what we are observing as a centralization of the technology in the end of a very few group of stakeholders, initially in the US and now a bit in China. So I think for us, the main question is how do we make sure that we keep the control of the company? Today, our founders and the employees have the majority of the capital, and so we have organized ourselves to maintain the control. And I think that's the most important part. We are indeed in Europe struggling with the level of investments, which is very, very different from the one we can observe in the US. I mean, the lack of venture capital is a true issue in Europe, but you can find an alternative. So I think I'm coming back to the point I made on AI adoption, because what matters when you are trying to raise funds is to demonstrate your ability to create value and to create revenue. That's the only thing that matters for investors. So we need absolutely to increase and foster the demand to increase adoption of the technology, and that's how we will indeed continue to raise funds and keep up in the race.
Okay. And we've been touching on this a bit, but looking at sort of the regulatory environment overall in Europe, the AI Act, Europe's AI Act, there has been an argument that it risks slowing innovation, that there's some overreach. Is regulation a European export? Is it a competitive advantage in any way? Is it an Achilles heel? What do you think, Audrey?
So on the AI Act, we were actually the first company signing the code of practice for implementation. I think, I mean, it was a very high number of hours spent in negotiating it, so it was worth it signing it after all of this work. I think ultimately what we want as a company is to create trust with our customers. And that's what matters. When I talk about AI adoption, there would be no adoption if we can't create this trust with the company we're working with public sector, with end consumer. So I understand that the idea and all European regulation have been built on this idea to protect the consumer. That's really how European regulation is made. So there's part of the AI Act that indeed satisfies this need, and it's an important one. But obviously, I mean, I would not go through the entire process, but as a lot of people know, this legislation was built before generative AI, and then ChatGPT happened, and they forced actually something about generative AI in the middle of the discussion because they didn't want to go through another legislative process, meaning that, honestly, it's not the best written legislation we have seen, and so it's difficult to actually make it really workable. For our part, which is not the entire part of the Act, I mean, it's a lot about transparency, documentation, it's not ideal, but it's clearly manageable. And if it can create trust with our clients who needs this transparency, this documentation, that's a good thing. Where there's more ambiguity is on our customer front, because some of them, they do not know where they will fail, what they will have to comply with, and that is the main issue for us. When you are in a commercial discussion and that the person tells you, oh, I'm not sure I can actually implement an AI model because I do not know what will be the requirement I will have to comply with if I'm going this way, we have a problem. When regulation and the uncertainty of the regulation is blocking the adoption of the innovation, that's where there's an issue. But I know the Commission is well aware of that. There's a digital omnibus coming, so there will be opportunity to fine-tune it, but hopefully to find a way to still protect the consumer, and I think that's all our goal. We want to build this trust, but also to find more predictable and something easier to navigate for the future.
And Minister, have you taken any lessons from the EU AI Act, and how is it going to inform the way the UK regulates the industry?
Well, we look at lessons globally, and of course, by virtue of being close partners to Europe, we look at the European experience as well. I think there are a couple of things on regulation. One, I don't think I sort of buy the argument of either being pro-regulation or anti-regulation. I think regulation in some places has been very compelling for technological innovation. I think about, for example, the open banking regulations in this country, which allowed a series of startups and venture firms. I used to be a fintech investor. I saw a ton of open banking startups create interesting ideas and companies on the back of it as well. And that was a regulatory move that displayed a very pro-innovation approach in government. And so I think that's a starting philosophical point. The second practical point is that when it comes to AI, our approach has been that AI application and regulation at the point of use, or thinking about the impact at the point of use, has been the most material vector to think about. And that's partly why when we've been thinking about the AI sandbox, we've been very clear that we need to make sure that a series of vertical-specific regulators are able to come together and think about the ways in which we can support consumers and businesses, but drive adoption in particular verticals. And so that's a very critical area of focus at the moment, and we're prioritizing areas where we think we can generate the greatest economic value through appropriate regulation and good state capacity.
And so many companies in the UK, Mistral in France, are operating on a global standard. How can regulators help them navigate different regulatory regimes? You know, how do you make sure you're compliant with the US, the UK, Europe? What are those conversations like?
Well, I think, again, it's sort of, for me, it comes down to conceiving of the role of regulation and regulators and government in a different way. We are trying to be way more hands-on, set up concierge services in government and across the regulatory context, because the main thing you can do in that sort of situation is to make sure that we're providing maximal clarity at the earliest possible point and working hand in hand with our firms as well. And I'm delighted, by the way, that Mistral, not only that Arthur come from DeepMind, but also we've been working very closely across the board, and I know colleagues of mine were before I joined as well. And so I'm very much looking forward to living that claim of close relationship management, to be able to make sure that Mistral and others feel that we have a very clear sense of regulatory picture here to deploy and adopt a lot more. Okay,
I've run out of time way too quickly on this one, so lightning round. Imagine we're sitting here in 2028. What does success look like for European and geographical European technological sovereignty? Is it a global champion? Is it a strong ecosystem? Is it control over our own standards and infrastructure? Audrey, what do you think?
I mean, our ambition has always been to be the European big tech. So by then, success will be indeed to be a strong company with a lot of employees, a big office in London, a huge office in Paris. But I think it's going to be, for us, if we talk about owning the technology, it means definitely having the choice on the entire value chain. So I think we will have succeed when we will have an offer that would be a good offer, not compromising on the quality and the security at every level of the value chain, from the chips to the model and deployment.
Okay. Kanishka.
4 quick things. One, we'll sit here and look back and say Britain's productivity picture, the real wages in this country were able to increase as a result of us driving growth through the use of AI. 2, we will have a sense that not only did we drive growth and productivity in real wages for people across this country, but that we are able to continue to do so because we have resilient access to critical parts of the supply chain. And 3, we're genuinely able to spread both the story and the reality of AI, which people feel bought into. It becomes a collective national mission that you feel right across the beating heart of South Wales, in Yorkshire, across the north of England and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and right across the centre of the capital as well. And as a bonus, Mistral has a huge office in London and a big office in Paris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.